So where is everybody else? Let's live.
Try to call them back. Need to probably have that.
But we just sent them the invite. So how do we access that?
This is when the kids are missing IOTs.
Yes.
Yes, so
They are not eating it.
I think we're okay. It sucks. Back to it.
So look, I drafted this serious motion. And it's scared that white boy.
We need Hakima.
Because of five motion. Got scared.
Go back to the other one.
Down.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Okay, thank you. Minneapolis Community and Technical College.
Nani.
Hey.
I will give you mine.
Okay.
Ali, can you hear me?
I can hear you. We just need to try to make sure that you and Esther are actually on the same channel. That's the problem that we're having right now, but I can hear you fine.
Okay.
So just hold tight with us. We may, the way this live system is, we may have to ask you to hang up and call in one more time.
Okay.
Or just,
Oh no, she's here already.
oh no, you're here, you're here. Okay, so you're already on, so don't move, Hakima. Now
Okay.
we're just trying to get Esther on.
We always get the students. We have 10 weeks.
Yeah, can you tell me?
To what?
So you can take it.
No, Sean has my card. I don't know whether my house keys.
All right, let's go ahead and get started.
So it's going slow. So Hakima, we're going to keep trying to get Esther on another line.
Okay.
It's on a little delay right now. So we're just going to go ahead and get started, and then I'm going to keep trying to get her online.
Okay. And brother, can you call on me?
Right. We're just going to go ahead and get started, and then I'm going to keep trying to get her online. It's delayed too.
And brother, can you call on me?
So, okay.
We got too many of them open.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, you should go ahead and start. You can't. Just refresh the screen because you have it.
We don't need this one. This is the one we need.
We can respect. We can respect. See, I'm not, but I will do last week. I will do. I'm not a selfish artist. I will do. But whatever I can. You know, I'm not one of these temperamental. Am I, John? Don't I always do whatever you ask me. But I will look. We got.
So how do we get rid of this other stuff?
So he rebelled. He's why we always gotta be careful about he did, he rebelled. He was only one with you. No, you know, you kept getting to the top. But we used to do it barefoot. We don't put on our shoes. We did it barefoot. He said, why we gotta be barefoot?
So the invites went out to everybody. Again, I read before.
Black folks. It's weird.
Right.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Ian Fadolo. I'm one of the folks here at Cooperation Jackson. And this is
Greenwood Hill, and I'm a board member of Cooperation Jackson.
we would like to welcome you to this event this weekend. And to kick this party off and get us started, what we're going to do is what we call libation. Within African tradition, we give honor to the four directions, north, east, west, and south. And we give honor to our ancestors, the shoulders upon which we stand. So I'm going to do an invocation, which is calling spirit, getting spirit's attention to let them know that, hey, we're ready to talk to y'all. We want you here, present, and give us your shoulders upon which to stand. And then Jeribu is going to share with you honor for certain particular people that need to be acknowledged this evening. And then I will go back to honoring general ancestors. At that time, I want all of you to call out the names of those people who were very important to you in your life that are no longer here. We say within African tradition, as long as you call that name, that person never is truly dead, which means that they always are there to access for information, to set guidance. You know, I'm not talking about them standing right there talking to you. If they did things in their lives, although they could be standing there talking to you, but we won't go there. If they did things in their lives that were important to you, someone came to me in Chicago. They talked about, oh, I'm so glad you said that my first grade teacher really, you know, it could be anyone. Call those names out. Think about the people who were very important in your life. So when I say hit it, I want you to call out their name as loud as you can.
Speak their own language and not speak the language of their oppressors. The first young man to die in that uprising was Hector Peterson, who was only 13 years old. He was shot in the back, just like so many other young Black children in the streets of Soweto. So June 16, 1976, mark it, and never ever forget what happened on that day. And as you remember June 16th, remember other uprisings where young people have taken it to the streets and defied the badge and the gun and defied the state itself to protect our people and to protect young Black lives and the lives of other oppressed people. So we say, in honor of the Soweto children, in honor of Hector and all those who fell, we say, Ashe.
Ashe.
Taking you back to June 16, 1944, George Stinney, the youngest person in the United States and in the 20th century to be sentenced to death and executed for a conviction of first-degree murder where he was accused of killing 2 young white girls. He was only 14 years old, and when they strapped him to the chair, the straps wouldn't even fit because he was just a little boy. When they put the mask over his face, it fell off because his head was too small for a grown man's mask. George Stinney, 1944, June 16th. And can you believe it, on December 17th, 2014, his sentence was vacated posthumously, 70 years after he was murdered by the state and he was innocent. He was exonerated while he lay in his grave. And we say for George Stinney, and for all of the George Stinneys, for all of the George Stinneys, we say, Ashe.
Ashe.
And we say, remember, never forget. How?
Remember, never forget.
Remember, never forget. Remember, never forget.
All right. Gotta give me a minute. Now we're going to call out the names of those ancestors that were very important to you. And I again want y'all to stand. Let's stand for a moment. All right. And I want you to lift those names out, and I want you to understand another reason why. Because of those things that have happened in the past that we were just reminded of, understand that those things have not gone away.
That's right.
They're still here, and they're getting worse. But guess what? We have a group of people who are becoming to open their eyes and understand what is going on around us. As we continue to correlate and pull our strength together, and we are clear about the battle that we have been pulled into, but are more than capable of waging, we are pulling our strength together. And I want all of us standing in this room, this moment, to remember that. There is nothing on the planet that can knock down a tree whose roots are so deep and its limbs are so tall that you cannot even see it all. Understand that. And that is who we are becoming. Now, get ready. You ready? Say them loud. I
Our Abbas, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Tamir Rice, Emmett Till,
Betty Lou Hamer,
Martin Luther King,
Emma Barker, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King,
Marcus Garvey.
Marcus Garvey, yes, yes, Henry Kirksey,
Annie
Franklin
Devine,
Hughes,
Annie Devine,
Annie Devine, say it loud,
Beverly Ball.
Beverly Ball,
Shokwe Lumumba,
Shokwe Lumumba,
Shokwe Lumumba,
Shokwe Lumumba,
Shokwe Lumumba,
Shokwe Lumumba,
Baba Menahuchi Kofiza, that's what
Rukia, Nubia Lumumba,
Nubia Lumumba,
Nubia Lumumba,
Nubia Lumumba, Nubia Lumumba, Ashe, 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 Ashe Oto,
Ashe Oto.
I mean, let it be so.
Let it be so. All right.
The stick is over here.
Thank you. I pretend I knew it was wrong.
All right, greetings everybody. We are still trying to work out some of the tech stuff with our folks. And we're being insistent on making it happen. Because we got a couple of people who are up at like midnight, 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, where we at right now. But they're folks, I think, somewhat similar to me with the exception of one, and only know the computer technology to the extent that you can send emails.
That's me, that's me.
Maybe a tweet or two. So we are still trying to work it out, and we're fighting a little bit of delay. So what I think we're going to try to switch up and do, which may be easy, it's going to be terrible for an online audience, which is folks are looking at it in a couple of different ways right now. We're probably going to stick to something a little more easy to try and true, but you won't be able to see people, which is by Skype. And so the audience will hear them, but will still be plugged up.
Skype, you can see too if they have
Only
a
one
camera.
person.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the two people who are talking in conversation, but if I do all four, then you hear four of the voices, but you won't see four faces. So we chose Google, just so y'all know, not to be fans or endorsing them, but we chose it because they do have an easier way to do that than Google right now. So give us just a quick second. I'm going to talk to the two folks who are live to try to figure it out and tell them to make this adjustment. You have Skype on your.
Yeah.
You have Skype on your.
Okay, one more announcement. Is there anyone in the room who has an objection to being photographed? No? Okay, cool. Thank you.
Well, it needs to be on practice.
Yes, yeah, I'm pulling up my Skype right now.
I'll leave it up just so I can try to catch something on the side. Yeah, that's the only thing that we adjust is the video thing. So we may cut off the live feed on YouTube.
Brandon, are you hearing me?
Oh, Hakima, you're here?
Yeah, how you doing, bro? Can you hear me?
I'm doing well. I can hear you, but I can't see you.
You can't see me? Okay. Looks like the video is on.
Okay, I might not have the right screen up. Is there a way that you can send me the link on the G chat?
Yes.
Why don't we just go with what we have?
Right.
And I'll keep trying to get Esther to get her to sign in. She just hit me back and says she's having trouble getting in. So Hakima, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Kali.
Okay, so we're gonna do a little bit of jazz here. And if you can, just give us in the audience a little bit of background on who you are and some of your take on those first questions that we had posed out for a few minutes as I try to get Sister Esther and Brother Lybon on the line. They're responding by email, but they're having a hard time connecting to the Google chat things. So until we bring them on, we just want to go ahead and get started. Is that okay?
That's okay. I wondered whether if there's a way to also hear from the audience who is there, why they're there, so that I can hear, at least while we're waiting. I see a beautiful room. It would be nice to hear.
That's weird.
Is it still not coming?
Nah.
So you can see us, Hakima, correct?
I can see you, yes.
Okay, so the audience.
Oh, there we go. There's something. Working out.
You can't see me?
we can't see you. And we do 2 of these calls. I do 2 of these calls a week. I don't have a moderator, but they work fine. But we want to do something for ourselves, and they act great.
I can't lie that I'm not that mad you can't see me, but it's okay.
See, yeah, let's just do a call, because I've got less up here than we have before.
Well, Hakima, we're going to switch on over to are you and her on Skype free? So Brandon's just going to connect you all on Skype.
Okay.
And we're going to try to figure out about it, because I know it's easy for other folks to do Skype as well. So just hop on to that.
I'm not a friend on here.
You're not a friend?
I'm going to add it. I can add it real quick.
Tell Brandon which Skype address of yours to go to.
Okay. Can you see the chat, Brandon? Should I add my Skype name there?
You can try,
Otherwise, it's
try to chat.
Otherwise, it's Hakima_Abbas.
Hakima_ what?
Abbas. ABBS.
At Gmail?
No, that's it for Skype, right?
Oh, it's
Just
Skype.
Hakima.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
I see you. And my computer's like loading and running slow, so please bear with. Okay, so I see you. Should we do video from here? Okay.
She can see the audience.
See, now we get it. What the?
No, it just can't go on and took her off.
Nah, she's on now. She's on now. I'm just gonna turn this off because she's on now from here. Hakima, we can see you now on the screen.
Oh, great.
Yeah, so we're good. I guess we can get started.
All right, Hakima, so you were asking a little bit about some of the folks here.
Mm-hmm.
So can you share a little bit about yourself first, and then we'll kind of just go like do a little popcorn style. The audience is going too hard and too long to do too many introductions. So just something brief, what you would want to share about yourself and your work. And then we can get into some of the questions and dialogue. And we're going to open it up much broader than what we originally had for the technology challenges. So if you can just start us off, we appreciate it.
Okay. Peace, everyone. How are you today?
All right, good.
Good. My name is Hakima Abbas. I am an African from lots of different places. But I am based at the moment in Dakar, in Senegal, in West Africa. I'm actually speaking to you though from the Czech Republic because I'm on a trip, and it's 1 a.m. over on this side. Sometimes it's not so coherent, but I'm really glad to be back. I've been organizing on the continent for about 10 years now. Before that, I was living in the diaspora. I lived in the US at some point and organized with the Malcolm X Grassroots movement while I was there. Yeah, and at the moment I'm part of a popular and political education collective called JANG, which is a Pan-African collective. So that's a bit about me.
And just a little bit about some of ourselves. So just so everybody knows, I think everybody knows, this is a piece that we organized. This is the first day. And to start a dialogue around Black Power being organized by the Malcolm X Grassroots movement in cooperation with Jackson. We thought that we would be remiss in not doing something to observe this 50th commemoration, which is not getting much attention throughout the United States. And I don't think we need to go too much detail as to say why. I mean, I think we kind of know why. The quest for Black power is still one which is very challenging to this empire, something that they definitely still want to deny. But as an organization, particularly from Cooperation Jackson's End, which is in the state of Mississippi, where that demand, I'm not going to say first got raised, but where it first was popularized and spread like wildfire from Greenwood, Mississippi. We thought we would be remiss in not making some contribution this year to acknowledge this history, but to also try to build on the legacy. And from our end, that particular vehicle, we are working towards economic self-determination, economic liberation, economic democracy. And that was one of the critical things I think we would argue was always at the heart of what was being demanded. But one of the aspects of it which was most critically denied and suppressed. So we want to challenge ourselves to have a broader conversation about that. So a lot of people here in the room, Hakima, I think represent a broad array of struggle. I can't characterize everybody, only the folks I know, and the little 1/10 of some of the work I know that some of the folks in the room do. But I mean, we have folks here who I think represent the gamut of folks working on political prisoners, workers' rights, LGBTQI rights, housing, food sovereignty. Who else am I? What are some of the other things I mentioned? Education, reproductive justice. Keep throwing them out. Is that all everybody do?
Cooperative economics.
Cooperative economics. Say it again. Environmental justice. So that's just a short snippet of kind of some of the folks who are in the room, Hakima, and you know what's represented here. But I think there'll be a broader range of folks that will be here throughout the weekend. But this is just to kind of get us started and give you a feel of who's in the room. And with that, just want to go into some dialogue. And since it's just a small group of us who are we're still going to try to get Esther on and Lybon on. Kind of while you're talking, just want to go with the first piece and kind of mix it up. And
I forgot that they were recording.
still there, Hakima? Okay. So if you could just kind of share how that kind of got interpreted in, you know, the Black communities, particularly the African communities in England, UK, you know, as you were growing up and learning, you know, how did Black power get interpreted and what did it typically kind of mean in that context?
Okay, will do, brother. I'm sorry, I got dropped at some point, so I missed parts of the question, but I think I heard the important parts. I've also, the video has shifted, so I now can't see anyone, but
Oh, that's probably
okay.
That was me. All right, there you go.
Thank you. Well, yeah, I mean, so as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm from lots of different places in Africa. My mother is Nubian from what they call Egypt at the moment. My father is Herero from what they call Namibia. And I was raised in the UK. And I was raised by a mother for whom the call to Black power was really significant. She was also raised in the context of deep racism in the UK, and the call for Black power from the US really resonated at the time in the 60s in the UK. And she joined many Black power formations there. But at the same time, there was the liberation movements also rising on the continent. And I think the intersection of all of those movements for Black power is what really resonated across the world and reverberated across the world. I say the thing about coming from multiple spaces because I think that's really important for us as Africans across geographies, to be understanding our realities as based in context in relation to land and people, but also as borderless and vast, because I think that's how that call resonates with people across those boundaries that were created for us, and across a lot of the divisions that people attempt to put to us. Ethnic divisions, religious divisions, gender divisions. And some of those divisions are what can erase and remove and other Black people to one another. So, and when I think about my own journey with this concept and idea of Black power, I also think about how we make Black power realities and how we live that. I know it's very hard to do that in our context because so much is about disempowering us. And so there's so little space for our own self-determination. But I think what you all are doing in Jackson, I think many of the ways in which we are living outside of imperialistic logic is really important and really holds what Black power is. When I think about the people who raised me and I think about my grandmother, how she embodied Black power. Black power was about how we treated one another and how we understood each other and understood each other in relation to one another, even if her work wasn't necessarily the work in movements per se. So that's kind of what shaped my understanding of Black power. And I think we can't underestimate in the moments the ways
You're
in
breaking up on us just a little bit, Hakima, to let you know. So sometimes if we slow down just a second, I've seen these things pick back up. But I just wanted to let you know it's about maybe the last minute was very choppy.
Okay.
So maybe I kind of just pick up from there. Again, just as you were talking about imperialism and imperialistic piece, I think the logic, the EU censors, I think, decided to intervene. So you might want to pick it up from there again.
Okay. Yes, I was just saying that the imperialistic logic of domination and of colonialism is one in which we have to get away from inside of ourselves, as well as in relation to each other. I think we have to understand that Black power is not just something that's systemic, but it's also something that is about how we value each other and how we relate to one another. And some of the experiments outside of of imperialism, outside of white supremacy, with some of the like what all of you are doing in Jackson around economic democracy, I think those are really important to grow and thrive outside of that imperial logic. I'll leave it there. I'll leave.
So the second question, and I think just to kind of open it up, and I think you were heading in that direction. From your vantage point, and I think you occupy a pretty unique vantage point, being located in Dakar, but being able to travel throughout much of the continent and throughout the world. I think you have a vantage point of seeing the impact of the current movement for Black lives, which is a continuation of that legacy and that struggle. How is that being interpreted, read, understood, and incorporated into some of the work of our people fighting, in various communities on the continent throughout the world?
Yeah, I think it's an important moment because I think it highlights what is happening in the U.S. To Black people, to African peoples. I think many folks, especially on the continent, don't necessarily have a sense of oppressed nations in the U.S. and the situation of oppressed nations in the U.S. So it's important to have seen that, and I think the movement for Black lives has brought up some of those issues, but it's done so through a relatively narrow lens. And I think what's missing maybe from what we're hearing outside of the US is the link to the generations of Black liberation movements across the world and in the US. I think one of the things that's also, but that's been important is I've seen young people in Nairobi, in Johannesburg, in Brazil, in other places, to whom that response to police violence and genocide is really something that resonates and that people understand and can appreciate the response to, and are themselves responding in different ways. I only wish that a lot of the information that comes out of struggles from these different places also was heard and reverberated across. So, as you said, I've been lucky and in a position to see either firsthand or know people who know what's happening in Colombia, in Venezuela, to African peoples in Central African Republic, in all of these places across the world. And I feel that, unfortunately, the channels of information are really limited. And so there's a way that we are not able to talk to one another, to learn from one another and to really strategize from one another and be inspired from one another. At the same time, it also allows for a different narrative to be created around what these movements really are. So what I hear largely about the movement for Black lives is that it started in Ferguson, and that it was, a response.
You're getting stalled out. The EU is messing with us again.
Where did you lose me?
You were talking about, I think you got stuck on the point of, I think you were making some suggestions on the different ways of being inspired, but also that we're limited in how we're being able to dialogue, communicate with each other. And I think you were heading towards some examples of where the inspiration is, where the gap is, if I understood correctly.
Yes. So I was saying, I feel the gap is also allows for a different narrative to be told about the movements that we're engaged in. So the narrative around the movement for Black Lives, that it started in Ferguson, and it in essence removes it from the Black liberation struggle more broadly, and the other issues that are being addressed by Black peoples in the US. But similarly, I think the ways in which, for instance, the students in South Africa are rising, and really with this Fees Must Fall, and some of the sisters are protesting in South Africa, again, that gets limited to an issue like fees at university, rather than understood as a continuation of a movement for Black liberation and against capitalism in those contexts. So I think these kinds of dialogues and the ways that we hear each other are really important.
Let me do just one check real quick before the next question. Did we get Esther on through Skype yet? She hasn't got to Skype. Okay. So building off of that, Hakima, and then, you know, folks, this is a dialogue between all of us, not just stuff like Hakima. So we're going to move away from that real quickly. But do want to try to tap into the specificity of her location, what she does. So another question, and maybe a starter question with an observation. You know, on Sunday there was a serious tragedy that happened in Orlando, Florida, and I think it's come out now that more than half of those who were killed were from Puerto Rico, and a good number of those folks, probably the vast majority, were people who were of African descent. And the issue isn't so much being framed in that way. I don't know if it necessarily, from my vantage point, necessarily needs to be framed that way, but I'm wondering, what the question is, I'm wondering, you know, over the past 5 or 6 years, maybe longer now, we've seen on the continent some very reactionary anti-LGBTQ legislation being adopted in country after country. A lot of them are being sponsored and promoted by right-wing Christian groups from the United States. You know, is there any dialogue since this Sunday that you are seeing that on the continent or in some broader diaspora groups that is now challenging some of this law and some of this framework that's being pushed and promoted on the continent so fiercely, in light of how much, I think, how much international news and coverage this story has gotten?
Thank you for the question, brother. It's difficult for me to answer in terms of what I'm hearing or seeing, because I've been on the road since it happened on Sunday, so I haven't been so connected to what's happening at home. But I also, and I think there's part of me that is also trying to not hear, because I fear the reactionary reaction. I would say this: I think a lot of the violent homophobia and heterosexism on the continent is part of that imperialistic logic that we've adopted and that we perpetuate amongst ourselves. A logic of domination and oppression, a logic of division, and one that serves the interests of the elites. There's a way in which both women and other oppressed genders are targeted in really real ways, and I feel like the weakness of a Pan-African narrative on the continent is also very strongly the patriarchy that's embedded in that. We see ways in which people use anti-imperialist rhetoric and anti-colonial rhetoric to perpetuate violence and violent homophobia. And that has to be challenged really significantly. I think we have a duty as a movement to be clear and be principled around our stance on. Are you hearing me?
We're hearing you fine now.
Oh, okay, it's just
Okay.
that,
Like on the screen.
that I saw Brandon close, so I wondered if he was fixing something.
No, I think we finally got some information to connect with Sister Esther. But keep going, please.
No, so yeah, I think we have a duty to be principled and to take a position and to be very clear about that position around our queer folk, and to make sure that
Now you're stuck. See, every time she starts getting sharp, the EU senses jump in pretty good. Maybe we should start talking about international finance. I'm sure that would come through very, very clearly. Hakim, if you're still there, hold on. It's still showing you, but it's clearly stuck. And I think Brandon's trying to do a Skype thing or something to bring it back in.
She got dropped.
She got dropped. Well, while she's coming back in, we do have another microphone. And we want to open it up. So when she comes back in, when Esther comes back in, you know, we will just be engaged in the conversation. The last thing I was really going to ask her as a lead-in is, you know, given we have the technological problems right now, but given the level of technology that we have, how do we bridge this gap between our people, be they in the Caribbean, Central South America, the continent, Europe, increasingly more African people in Asia, different parts of Asia? How do we break this gap, this communication gap? And end, I think the point that I wanted to bring up, how do we kind of end this one-way dominant narrative, which is primarily from English-speaking countries and primarily from the United States, where it appears that we are kind of the center of activism and action in the African world, which is not true. But you know, if you look at the imperialist media, you kind of get that framework, because there's very little information that is sent our way, even for those of us who look for it. And I'm one of the people who look for it. It's like on the internet, combing the fine-tooth comb, trying to find out what's happening in South Africa, what's happening in Nigeria, what's happening in Kenya, what's happening in Sudan. You know, I got to go out and actively search for it. So how do we, and I know, you know, just been fortunate enough to also do a lot of traveling myself and stay in contact with people, you know, comrades like Hakima, to get kind of on the ground updates, but not all of us have that access. So how do we, just want to take some suggestions, particularly from folks who are on the Instagram world, the Twitter world, the Facebook world, and all the other things they got out there that I don't know about. How do we kind of bridge this gap to be engaged in these active conversations about the different struggles that we have taking place throughout the world? That's an open question to all of you. And anybody can come grab the mic and offer some thoughts on that. How do we bridge the communication gap? You know, how do we stay embedded across the Pan-African world, and even across the United States? I would say we're not as directly in tune or in touch with each other and sharing our experiences around what strategies, tactics that we're employing, how they work. You know, what are the lessons that we draw from that? I don't even think we're doing that well in the United States, if the truth be told. So how do we kind of bridge that gap? And particularly in an era like this, where there is so much technology readily at our fingers, that we're still not kind of learning and not learning, I think, as quickly as we should, as deeply as we should, and assimilating those lessons to our organizing work wherever we may be. Don't be shy, gentlemen. You scratch, go ahead.
And I think that your question sort of suggests what some of the issues might be. And that is that perhaps maybe the very fact that we have so many ways in which we can communicate is reflective of the kind of inability to see and connect up to a bigger picture. That perhaps we're not communicating because we don't know what we should be communicating about. That, the fragmentation that is, I think, a central characteristic of this historical moment is reflected in our inability to really figure out what it is that connects all of us together. What might be some of the common issues and problems that impact on African people and most oppressed people. So there's no motivation for us to communicate among ourselves, to see that there's a need to communicate among ourselves, that we can have all the technology in the world, but we'll use that technology to figure out where the next party is and who's doing what and what kind of fashions are now popular, as opposed to using that technology to try to liberate ourselves.
That was a escape. I don't know. Hakima said she was back. Okay.
He's back over there.
I think dovetailing on that comment. I think we have to get real with some of the conversation. For example, recently over at the Smith Robertson Museum, they had a conference or town hall meeting that was a call to talk about race relations. And it was a polite conversation. So we really didn't talk about race relations. We have to recognize that our race relations have not been polite. And so we got to talk about it in the framework of how it has come down. We, for example, we talk about Emmett Till, or even the young man that was executed, George Stenning. And you talk about how 60 years, 70 years later, they want to excuse that so that they can take it out of history. They say that, well, we've commuted his execution and sentence. I mean, we can take it out of history. Well, they're also taking the word slavery out of history, as if it never happened. We haven't talked about Medgar Evers in terms of how he was assassinated. We're right here in Jackson, Mississippi, actually called Medgar Evers Ville. And we're not even talking about, we got people in this room, I bet, who don't really know his history, don't know his story, don't know his work. And as a consequence, we're not demanding restitution for the loss of his life to our struggle. And when we say restitution, then we have to go and get deeper and talk about reparations, which is one of those things that we didn't call out when we talk about the various struggles that we're in. So again, it can't be a polite conversation. We got to get down and dirty. And then in the process, we got to be open-minded to the idea that we may have to say that white supremacy and capitalism are the cause of our issues in America, and that we have to confront those demons, because that's what they are. White supremacy and capitalism are demons. It's capitalism that forced us over here, and it was white supremacy that switched it from from servitude to chattel slavery. And then we have to understand the difference between the slavery that we read about in the Bible, quote unquote, and the slavery that Africans in America and throughout the diaspora have experienced. And we have to be able to talk about that raw. So I think, again, we have the opportunity, we have a medium with Skype and all the other chat boxes that we have, but we got to quit just being polite. We got to quit social media and start doing some serious conversation.
Any other comments?
Yeah, just a thought, comparisons to the human body. The human body has a brain that communicates through its nervous system. The nervous system takes that information to all of the parts of the body so that everybody is on the same accord. One challenge that we have as a people, as a race, is that we don't have that same cause. We don't have the same purpose. Many of us think that we are free. Many of us think that we are liberated. So the education of the cause, the education of the purpose, the education or sharing of the knowledge is so significant, specifically to the young people, because the young people think that, you know, it's an integrated world, that it's love, peace, and happiness, and that there's no need for certain things to be pushed back against. But with all of our different technologies and our ability to communicate, if we don't have that cause, if we don't have that same mindset, that same purpose, that or a vision, you know, for us as a collective race of people, then we can't have that same level of communication. So it's important to continue to educate, and particularly with the young people, with this next generation that is coming up, for them to understand the history, which is not being taught, for them to understand the cause and the necessity, and what does freedom and independence actually look like. You know, that's so significant. But again, that nervous system has that ability to take it to all the different parts, like you mentioned, all of the different causes that people were working in. All of this a part of Black liberation, being the big picture.
Hakima, we noted that you're back. Is there anything that you want to add on from what you hopefully were able to hear from the last three folks who were able to speak?
When the brother was just speaking about Black liberation and how we imagine and the need for a vision for Black liberation, that resonated for me, particularly because I found that the hardest piece of the work is all of us coming together and being able to imagine what freedom looks like. And I think I've understood freedom to be not a destination, but a process that we will perpetually be working towards liberation. And right now it feels that we know, I guess to paraphrase Osata, we know more about what freedom isn't than about what it is. And so that visioning exercise, that like being able to collectively come to some ideas about what we imagine it could look like is so important, because if we don't know what we're fighting for, we won't be able to get there, I feel. So that was it. That was all that came up for me, Kali.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's really throughout this weekend, we want to spend the most of our time doing that type of vision. And we were very clear, if you want to just start going on up, very clear, but we, you know, the communication information that we sent out, I just want to reiterate, you know, now that is really what we want to spend the bulk of our time this weekend, not so much really focusing on creating another list of demands. Not that demands aren't important, don't get me wrong, in the least. But our folks have been, at least in the United States, pressing for some of the same fundamental demands for as long as we've been here. But really want to focus on the vision of where we're trying to go and what type of vehicles do we need to build in order to get us there. So that's kind of the conversation we wanted to have. And tonight, really was in honor of the 50th anniversary, first and foremost, which is why we kind of started on the Accra night, which was Thursday, and then trying to go on the next couple of days. So I just wanted to reiterate that, take the opportunity since Hakima opened that up, that is one of the central things we want to focus on this weekend.
Good evening, brothers and sisters.
Good evening, brother.
My name is Jamario Suttles. I'm from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm a student at Minneapolis Community and Technical College. Going to be the president of the African Educational Empowerment Program, as well as the in the political club to the African Continental Club. And I'm not exactly too fluent with the actual networking over computers or phones, but in that type of connection. But I want to talk about a general connection between the diaspora and the indigenous Africans. First of all, there is no difference. The only difference is that we're here, they're there. Genetically speaking, so Akil, we are all these different mosaics of Africans, but we all are African nonetheless. And once we understand that we are a part of that African ethnicity, ethnicity being a synonym for identity, I say ethnicity because I like to think of it as an engrossing understanding of self, where I think identity is just temporary. So once we understand that we are indeed the African mosaic, we are indeed the African ethnicity. And that will give us that self, communal, and spiritual engrossment among our pilgrimage through this realm and to the next. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Any other comments, feedback?
How's everybody doing?
Good.
One thing I wanted to highlight in this conversation as we talk about social media and how we use it as a form of communication is that one of the limitations of it is that it is still controlled by the powers that be. One thing that we have seen through Facebook and Twitter and even Google is that when things come up that they don't want to be publicized, they're quick to censor your page, shut your page down, and things of that nature. A study just came out saying that for Google, negative things that were being said about Hillary Clinton, they shaped the search criteria so that those things that you have to put in very specific keywords to get negative things to pop up about hood clean. So we have to be clear that although these are great opportunities to communicate across this planet, that there are a lot of limitations to those things. I think another thing that is important to think about is language as a barrier. When I go on Twitter or Facebook or any of these apps, I can search all day for different things from different places in the world, and they never pop up. But when you put it in that language, Arabic or Spanish or any of the African dialects, it's more likely that it will pop up. So how do we begin to educate people in this country and in other countries identify, because there are people here that speak those languages, and how do we identify them and help them, work with them to translate some of the language and the messaging. I agree with what the brother was saying around we all are African people. But one thing I think that I was thinking about as the brother was talking is that we have to figure out how to make it as plain as we possibly can, so that our folks are able to take this information in and understand it. Even when we produce Facebook and Twitter posts and things of that nature, the thing that happens is that folks read your post and they don't, it goes beyond their understanding, right, or the level of education that's provided in this country. So how can we begin to create messaging that is as basic and as simple as possible, that people here in this country can understand, and that people in other places can resonate with them as well.
Yeah, that one thing you touched on is linguistic democracy, and not just having an Anglo or English speaking dominated dialogue and discussion around these things. And at least for those of us in the U.S., and I include myself in learning another language, I think there's a lot of onus on us to learn other languages so we can engage, and not just have everything be on our own terms. Particularly as English is becoming more and more a dominant language, particularly in business throughout the world, and education. So that is a barrier that we're going to have to fight through. And we can get, we done had all using, I'm just mentioning, I'm just trying to encourage other folks, other body folks to step up and grab the mic. It's just being a good list of brothers. I ain't mad at y'all, or mad at us, but just, go on, okay. I'm mentioning it for everybody else, and, don't be afraid of the mic.
Well, I want to just kind of come back and raise a question to, in reaction to things last two comments made around African identity. Bakari Brown, great revolutionary from beginning to South, he said that, in essence, he said in so many words, it's an accident of nature when we find ourselves, as he used the term, brothers. But it is the consequence of political will for us to be comrades. What does he mean by that? It seems that what he meant was that while we can agree that we are an African people, the question then becomes, what is the value of that beyond that recognition? That is, we can be African people, but what is the basis for us to have an agreement that we need to engage in struggle? What is it about us being African that's special if we can't identify what forces are arrayed against us that deny us our full humanity? What responsibility, for example, do we have in the US as African people when we recognize or should be talking about the kinds of policies and positions and behavior by the US state that has a detrimental impact on other African people around the world and indeed on most of humanity? So these questions, for me, are political questions we have to really grapple with. And I'm hoping that we grapple with these questions this weekend. That while it's important to recognize our Africanness, there's value in that, no question about that at all. The real struggle we have to raise is what is the basis for us to forge a political project? What is it that we are up against? And going back to that vision question, what is it that we envision that will transcend our present situation? These are, I think, important political questions, and they are questions we have to struggle around. It's not an easy thing that we are involved in. You know, we can't come together for a couple of days and engage in easy conversation around, you know, who we are and this and that, and it's nice to embrace that and to love each other. We've got to figure out and struggle among ourselves some common directions, developing some common programs. And we're not going to come out this weekend with full agreement, but we have to recognize we've got to engage in serious struggle among ourselves. So I just wanted to just kind of raise that as an issue for us to think about as we go through this weekend. And basically, we have, in my opinion, some particular kinds of responsibilities here in this country. And I wanted to ask the sister if in the conversations outside of the U.S., how do people see the responsibility of Black people in the U.S., being that we are at the center of the heart of this empire that is responsible for so much death and destruction around the world? Do people see African people in this country as having a special responsibility? And if so, are we living up to that responsibility?
Yes, that's such an important question. And I think it's made it even more complicated by the Obama era, as it were. I think when you have the face of imperialism being a Black person in the US, it really is confusing as to the position of Black people in the US and the complicity of Black people in the imperialism of the US. And so one of the things that we've seen under Obama is an ever expanded military presence, US military presence on the continent of Africa. We're seeing, I mean, we saw the US bomb and invade Libya, an African country, in ways that we hadn't before. We're seeing the US use excuses as humanitarian intervention, like around the Ebola crisis, and others to put, as they say, troops on the ground in Africa. And what that means for the future on the continent and what it means for US imperialism on the continent is really clear. I think what we're going to see, which is actually really scary, is the spillover of some of the conflicts in the Middle East and the religious fundamentalisms into Africa. I think we've seen it with Boko Haram in Nigeria. I think we will see it ever increasing in West Africa. And the consequence of that will be many African lives lost. And African life.
You froze on us, Hakima. I don't know if you can hear me. While we're waiting for her to come back, how many people here know what Afrikaans is? Raise your hand. So the vast majority of us have never heard of Afrikaans. So just in brief, and I want everybody, if you got some pen and paper, to write it down. Afrikaans is the African Strategic Command of the U.S. military. It's a new division of the U.S. military
that was first thought of by Bush Sr., first put on the drawing board by Bush Jr., but not fully implemented until Barack Hussein Obama became president. And it's something that was created strategically, not just its only purpose, but one of its main purposes was to have the U.S. military have more direct military bases on the African continent, to penetrate the African continent further, so that the competition over who's going to dominate the continent increasingly between the United States and China and Russia, I would say too. Well, there's a bunch of folks getting into the game again, but particularly those two, right? And to give the U.S. Play to its advantage, which is military, more so now than it is strictly economic. And to use that as a strategic lever and access to continue to control Africa's resources. And then when I mean African resources, think of almost everything that you can think of under the sun, including water, which is becoming increasingly more and more strategic asset that the imperialist powers have to control, as the sources of clean, portable water are drying up all over the planet. Okay, and Africa sits on a couple of key reservoirs that are somewhat largely untapped. Libya wasn't just about oil, it was also about water, right? The Sahara Desert has 3 large aquifers, underground water underneath it, which they want strategic access to, I should say. So this is one of the things to keep in mind when Hakima was talking about Boko Haram, which is an political Islamic force that operates primarily but not exclusively in Nigeria. There's a whole bunch of things to say about that. It's not the only one. Folks may have heard last year there was some bombings in Bamako. There was one, I think, in Ouagadougou. And wasn't there something in Mali not too long ago, Hakima?
Yes, in Mali and in Cote d'Ivoire.
So, you know, this whole piece of how political Islam or militant Islam or radical Islam, whatever they want to call it, we have to do our homework to understand first and foremost that most of this reactionary Islam is actually a historical product of Western imperialism, primarily starting with the British, but it's something that has long been a tool of particularly British, French, and increasingly U.S. imperialism over the span of the last 100 years. So it's not a new political thing. This is something that's gained more strategic use for them since the 1970s. And, you know, be it Egypt with assassination of Sadat, to Afghanistan and the Mujahideen force that they raised to eliminate the government there, the communist government that was there, on down the line to the Taliban, Al Qaeda, and everything else you see. That you know, folks are being kind of force fed ever since. So this is a part of a Western strategic aim and objective of continuing to control the chessboard. So we need to understand that Africa is a key part of that chessboard, a very key part of that chessboard. And they're going to move more and more of these forces into the continent. Part of what I would argue, and maybe people can have a different opinion, but part of the thing around taking out Gaddafi, who was not perfect by any means, but that has opened up some of the floodgates to allow more of these Islamic forces to penetrate deeper and deeper into the continent. But you weren't finished, Kim. You got broke up. I want to come back to you real quick.
No, I think you've said it all, Kali. That's where I was heading, that I think they've opened up floodgates and they're not afraid to open more, because African lives don't matter to them. And the intention is really the land grab, the resource grab. We are seeing the penetration of US capitalism into the continent like never before, but we similarly with Europeans and Asian. You mentioned China, but they're not the only players. I think we see nearly every player in the continent really trying to grab land, grab seed, forest, water, all of the resources that we have, and more and more the necessity is to do that as cheaply as possible. That means cheap labor, that means just environmental devastation, that means grabbing, and our governments on the continent are complicit with this. I think we are also seeing, and we have to recognize, an internal capitalist elite that is complicit with the capitalist forces externally. And some of them are even using the rhetoric of Pan-Africanism in other contexts, or using queer folk to distract from all of the other things that they're doing in our countries. And so those are things that we have to pay attention to and really recognize what the forces at play are. It's never simple, it's always complex, but I feel African people are often on the losing end of that stick.
And then John was not going to let you get away with answering the point that I know he was really trying to bring home, is the role of Africans here in the United States in fighting the beast. How effective are we, in your opinion, and from what you can see and observe, how good of a job are we doing at that, Mr. President? Eric.
I agree. I think you have a responsibility. From your location, you have a responsibility. And I think when you fight the forces that are oppressing you, you're fighting the forces that are oppressing us. And so in that fight, there's also an important connection. But it's also important to deliberately make that connection. Police violence and the militarization of the police in the US is also a militarization that's being exported all around the world. The prison system is a system that's being exported all around the world. We're seeing US prison companies or security companies trying to build similar prisons in South Africa. I think we have to understand also the ways in which capitalism and imperialism works in the US and how it gets exported. We're seeing like Walmart really making inroads in East Africa. What is that going to mean for workers? What's that going to mean for our economies? It's devastating. And I think the responsibility to push back in the US is clear and important. I think part of Ajamu's question was also, how is it viewed from the continent? And as I was saying, in the Obama era, I think that's complicated. I think there was a celebration around Obama in the continent, which I was surprised at, but because I thought we, if anything, understood what it is to have Black people in power and still perpetuate colonialism. But there was a celebration, and there is not a clear consciousness around how that positionality relates to the position of the masses of African people in the US. I think the Black Lives Matter moment maybe shifted some of that consciousness, but still, I think the majority of African peoples in the US are not clear about what that looks like in the US. So we have work to do.
Come on.
Thank you. I'm here.
I drove down today with my family. We're from Ohio, and I've been listening and really taking everything that I'm hearing in. I'm also sick. I waited to come to Mississippi to get sick. Anyway, it's crazy. One of the things that I've been thinking about listening to this conversation and around at least what I see around organizing work that we do in Ohio is this idea of trauma in the community. I used to get really frustrated that people would not get involved, right? Or people would not fight. And ancestors both, Amos Wilson and Dr. Bobby Wright are some of my favorite teachers. And I've been thinking about how when we organize, we don't talk about the battle for our very minds. And I think that's really critical in this work. Not just healing, but even our own consciousness and having a radical love for each other, right? And I think that, at least for me, the confusion is on purpose, right? I mean, with Black people being in power, like the president, like you can't really have a decent conversation with a lot of our elders about him. I mean, when it comes to this, I mean, they'll end up literally in a fight, at least in my community, when we talk about these things, because I think they see this hope, right? This psychology. A lot of it is psychology, and it works. So what is our game plan to deal with the psychology of our people? I think that's a huge question to me. I'm still waiting on an answer.
Any answers out there?
Can I say a little?
Go ahead, Akil.
Just to say, sister, I hear you. I think that's a large part of the struggle is in our minds, and it's in also understanding that we can win. That's what I was trying to say also about the liberation. Can we envision it? Can we enact it? Even in the small times that we have together, like now in this space that you're creating in Jackson, can we be Black love? Can we be Black self-determination with one another? Was it Sonia Sanchez who said our job, the job of an artist is to make revolution irresistible? I don't know, I'm quoting the right.
Tony Kate Barbara said that.
Okay, Tony Kate Barbara. Yes. So I think that is also part of our role as organizers, as people who are agitating for Black liberation, is to really make revolution irresistible, make the logic of liberation self-evident. Because capitalism certainly makes capitalism self-evident. They have a way that they make their logic feel inevitable. And I think 50% of the work is reversing that. I see it on the continent, particularly in places like Kenya, where our only framework for understanding how to lift ourselves from this situation is to be part of the capitalist system, and the scramble to be part of that, which is a misunderstanding of capitalism. If it worked that way, then it wouldn't be capitalism. So we need to do the work really to make liberation irresistible. And as the sister said, that means overcoming many traumas. It means overcoming also many dynamics of power that we have internalized. Kali, when you were calling on the non-cis male folk to come up, and you said, don't be afraid of the mic. It's not just a fear, it's a socialization. We're told not to speak, and so we don't. And our brothers are told to speak and to be strong and to stand. And so we can be in the room, and I know in this room, everyone who is being quiet has a lot to contribute. But these dynamics are dynamics that we need to be able to push through. We need to fight. We need to hear each other. We need to be very conscious of how we respond to one another as well. Because if a sister does stand up, how is she valued and how is she made aware that that trespass that she has done, that is valued and that contribution is important. So all that to say, thank you, sister, for standing up.
Peace, how you doing? I just want to know, as an African American, where do you recommend someone that's never been in Africa, where do you recommend to start, a place to go? A lot of people I know, you talk about Africa, they think of Africa as a country where like some place to go to. They don't know it's a huge continent with many different cultures. So, where do you recommend a good place for us to start?
That's a difficult question, brother. Where to start? It depends what we're looking for. The continent, the way I have experienced the continent is to make the continent my home, wherever I am. And I think if we come with that spirit, if we come in solidarity, that doesn't necessarily mean not understanding the differences. We have differences, we all do. We have differences wherever we are geographically, we have differences that we need to celebrate and that we need to embrace. And that doesn't also mean that we won't be rejected. So I was raised in the diaspora. I'm often told that there are cultural ties or cultural norms that I am not, that I'm not aligned with, and that makes me other. But I'm other everywhere, so that's okay. I can be other. Because I know that I'm African, and what that means for me is a responsibility and a duty to fight for African peoples wherever we are, in the context that I am. So if I'm in Harlem, that means getting involved in the context of Harlem and getting involved in that struggle. If I'm in Nairobi, that means getting involved in that struggle. And wherever I can, it also means making the links and bringing folks together and trying to see how we can talk to one another and understand each other across those geographies. So brother, I don't know where to start, but start. I think if you have the opportunity to talk to folks from the continent, to be on the continent, I know that's difficult, but if you have the opportunity, I think those experiences are really important. And don't get disheartened by folks, othering, because that's okay. We,
You froze up again. Akil. As you see, it's zooming out. So while we wait for her to come back, any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I think one more time, one of the things that we have to do in dovetailing on what sister said and what the other sister said, for whatever reason, we're going to have to force ourselves to become active active in this conversation. We all have a contribution to make. Some of us, I guess somewhere in the book it says that where much is given, much is required. Well, even where a little is given, there is still a requirement. And so while you may think that your contribution may be small, the contribution is significant. And so we all got to make a contribution. So I guess at this point, I would challenge each of us to come to the mic and make a contribution. I think it's going to be easier for us to link together, knowing where we are, as opposed to trying to guess where each of us are. And that's going to be extremely important in terms of moving this, and we have to have some movement. We have to have some movement in terms of moving this process forward. I know a lot of times we look for the panelists to give us all the answers, but I think the best way to learn is to teach, and the best way to teach is to learn. And so we should all be teachers and we should all be students.
And speaking to that, so tonight and tomorrow are really throughout the course of the time that we're going to spend with each other. This is really the only time there's going to be a panel type format. We wanted to make sure that we broke up some of the socialization of the folks who have the mic, all the experts, and have all the answers. We really wanted to break that up. And we tried to structure a program that does that, and to base it on a series of, preliminary framing questions that try to lead us to a process of developing a program of action, a broad kind of program of action. We're not going to solve all of our problems in the next 4 days, not possible. But we want to do some visioning, we want to do some sharing of, what might it look like, for us to build what we need to strengthen our position, to build some power to change the world. So, think about that. Some of the questions I think will probably come natural, some will probably be a little bit forced, but that's fine. We don't expect everybody to feel comfortable in whatever group that you break out in. Some things you may know a lot about, some things you may know very little about. Having a great deal of knowledge is not a prerequisite of participating. Being willing to struggle is the only real criteria. Struggle with yourself and struggle with others in the principal matter. That's the only criteria of participation, really for the entire weekend. That we try to figure, this out and walk a little bit further down the road. Tomorrow, as we start to transition out, tomorrow we've invited a few people to do some interrogation, if you will, of the history around Black Power, because we think even how that phrase came into being, how it came to be uttered, there's a story to be told there that is not often told, even by history books as we write.
That's right.
To be honest with you. One of the things that, just to draw folks out, we want to be very mindful of is the role of women in the articulation of Black Power as a demand, as a phrase. Because there's a lot more to that than what happened actually on, June 16, 1966, that happened behind the scenes that didn't wind up being, on that bus platform that got articulated. There were a number of women who were influenced by Rand Revolutionary Action Movement and other organizations that were pushing for some change in direction within SNCC and a lot of our other organizations, of which that demand and that piece wound up being kind of a culmination of an organizing process and a process of struggle. So we want to make that plain, put it on the record for folks to learn from and contend from, because Hakima and others have mentioned, that patriarchal socialization did not disappear in 50 years. It's going to take a long time. Still, even with the current generations, I think greater knowledge of it, greater awareness of it, for thousands of years of socialization to be undone and programmed and to be destroyed. But it's work that we have to do and have to commit to in the work. So that's one of the pieces we really want to start with, and also to kind of lay some things there. We also really want to have throughout this entire weekend an intergenerational discussion. Just from our vantage point, and wearing two hats here, from Cooperation Jackson and the Malcolm X Grassroots movement, we, I would say, have a general tendency to don't hold a position that any one generation has a monopoly on the truth, but we do value the experience of our elders to the extent possible in providing some of their experience and reflections on things that they went through, which are similar to the things that we're going through. History don't exactly repeat itself, but we know there's a lot of patterns in history. Right? Things keep coming up again and again and again until they're resolved. So children are welcome here. She can scream, holler. That's not a thing that we trip on. So just to be mindful of that and throughout the weekend of what we're striving for, what we're asking all of you to do, and others as they come in tomorrow and on Saturdays, more people keep coming in and able to participate. For us to kind of, those of you who are here tonight, to kind of take that as a lead from here on out, really trying to engage in dialogue and struggle for everybody to participate and engage and bring forward your ideas and your thoughts, however undigested they may be or undefined they may be, you know, bring them out. And we'll deal with it.
A couple of things, Lena. Sister Hakima, what you said about connecting with the struggles of fellow Africans wherever you are really struck a chord as someone who spent some time living in South Africa, spent a little time in Somalia and various countries in Europe as well. And also the point you made about about being othered and not letting that deter your work. I mean, I think one of the things that's been a big learning for me has been, I can't do this work, expecting to be loved and liked and accepted by everyone. You gotta be secure as far as why you're doing what you're doing, and then keep doing it. This is about the work. It's not about being liked and being accepted, So I've been staring at this sign here all night. International Decade for the People of African Descent. And it's so interesting that that's up here because I read the flyer that was up front, and it's been difficult finding information about this. I've been hearing about this from different people. Speaking of a friend of mine who's doing some amazing work in the Netherlands, kind of mentioned that, she's been hearing about this too, and there may be this person, that person. So I'm really interested in some of what's coming out of this organization, and maybe some of what's happening on the side of the ocean where you are, and also too what's happening, maybe a preview of what sort of organizing might be happening in Montreal at the World Social Forum meeting later this year. Thank you.
This international decade, where did John go? Oh, there he is. I think we got to give credit where credit is due. And a lot of people do a lot of work that's not appreciated or actually despised. And it was through, to a certain extent, through the auspices of the U.S. Human Rights Network when he was a director, that this piece even actually came into being. Because the notion of it is something that comes out of the Third World Conference Against Racism in Durban in South Africa in 2001. And if the United States and the European Union would have fully had their way, this is something that would have been dead and buried. But it was a number of forces, including forces in this room, that kept pushing forward and forcing their way through. We weren't alone. Don't get me wrong on that. We played a part in keeping that conversation alive and forcing it to kind of move forward, in a broader alliance of forces. Now, unfortunately, in part due to the resources, it's something that I think we are trying to reclaim, let me put it that way. But I think some of the framing of it kind of got lost with a more revolutionary and progressive minded forces that have been pushing it. I think we got it to a certain point, and then for a number of different reasons. Some of us weren't in the same position anymore, or kind of out of position, didn't have the same entree access, or even sometimes I can speak for myself, was more focused on supporting the elections and stuff here and doing work here in Jackson and paying attention to not that wasn't paying attention, but at the time the struggle for it once it was kind of crossing the finish line. So it kind of got redefined in a way which I'm not gonna say is not helpful, but it didn't get at what we wanted to get at, right? Because reparations should, in my opinion, should be in that title, right? And that was some of the original stuff that we were pushing for, but there was some compromises that got made, particularly with the United States and the EU. This is the United States government that was, being presided over by Barack Hussein Obama that watered this down. So I want everybody to be mindful and clear about that. Started with the Bush administration, but we need to make it known while we got this opportunity as an international audience that he did him and Susan Rice and some others did some major hit work to make sure that the Durban Declaration and Program of Action that came out of the World Conference Against Racism was basically thrown in the garbage and destroyed. That was something that they took on and been trying to force on them. That they tried to remove that document and still struggling to remove that document from being a leading and a guiding document of this international decade. And one of the reasons why, because it made some recognition towards the transatlantic slave trade and the crime against humanity, and some justice, recompense, and reparation and restoration was due. So that was a part of that document, a small historic breakthrough that happened as a result of that conference that they're trying to bury. So the reason why you're not hearing a lot about it is intentional.
That's right.
Even the UN ain't promoting this thing.
Yes.
Matter of fact, I know I was on the email thread, I know John was on it. One of the when we did, while we produced this, there was a UN group that came to do a tour of the United States, led by Marie Fanon and his friends. They were here, they came here in January. The office that she worked with, that office is basically being defunded just within the last 2 weeks. So you're likely to hear even less about it than we did before. Now, I think we got to take that as somewhat of opportunity. That means that if anything is going to happen, it's going to now be defined more by what they call civil society, which is the social movements. And some of these big old opportunists, NGOs, but mainly the social movements, that we now, I think, if there's anything going to happen, it's going to be more defined by us and it's going to be defined by them. Just because they're going to try to drop it. So that's somewhat of an opportunity. If we get our act together to frame it and be able to do, we may not be able to travel here and there all over the world, but we can work on trying to do some of the things like this where people can stay connected and improve on and get better, get our own servers, get off of GChat or Google and all of that kind of stuff that we can do that and work on doing that. Now, the cooperation in Jackson, there is a small delegation of us at this point in time, which are already planning on going. Something broader can be organized if we raise the resources to do it. To the World Social Forum, which is going to be in Montreal, Quebec, August 9th through 14th, right? So we're going to do some programming there. We're working with Marie Fanon and the Frantz Fanon Foundation to do some programming there. And we just got in contact with two different groups of primarily, one is a very explicit Haitian organization which is based in Montreal, that's tied to the People's Movement in Haiti. So we just got reestablished in contact with them to do some shared work. That's just within the last couple of days that's taking place. So there is an emerging program that we're working on and trying to get people to come, particularly folks who are in North America who might have a little easier time getting there, to make their journey come up and use the opportunity to have international dialogue and exchange and further work on what's our vision, what's our plan, where we're going, how we get there.
I wanted to just support what Comrade Khalid just said and just take us back a few tiny steps to talk about Durban and how that was when the hardest hits started to come down on those of us who were resisting the United States government's literally thumbing its nose at the World Conference Against Racism. And never before in the history of these world conferences have you seen a document coming out of the conference being trashed, completely set aside, and it was a people's document. And there was resistance every day in the form of protests, in the form of press conferences denouncing the United States for the failure for its failure to really address its race issue, which, of course, at the center of it was chattel slavery and the North Atlantic slave trade, and the fact that reparations were due. And we called for that at that conference. And we called for it in an organized way and in solidarity with our brothers and sisters from the motherland. It was some strong solidarity. The brothers and sisters took the lead in calling for reparations for chattel slavery, for those who were victims of the North Atlantic slave trade. And that was some serious solidarity that had to be crushed, that had to be stumped out. And if you see today where you talk to the average African that looks like you and me, and when you mention Africa and they repel that, and they don't really want to talk about Africa, that is by design as well. The stripping away of consciousness. The fact that there was a time when being Black really was beautiful, and it was more than a slogan, it was programmatic work focused around the preference to be lifted up and not be slaves. So I think we got to get back to the awareness piece. We got to get back to making Black power a reality again, and not being afraid to use the term Black power and not being afraid to call ourselves African. It's certainly a start, and some people might say that's symbolic. But when we were in Durban, we did feel like being part of the international community. We didn't feel isolated. We didn't feel alienated. We united with the brothers and sisters from the Dalit community, from the Zulu community. We were one, and we even organized and held down the cultural stage, the people stage. And that's where all of the great artists from all across the world were pushed to that stage, sponsored by Amnesty International and a few other human rights organizations. Even the culture of resistance was resisted. And so we had a separate stage because they had all the highfalutin people on the big stage, right? The corny stuff, the bad stuff, the non-singing stuff. And on our stage, we had some serious stuff going on, and the culture was lifted up. And we had cross-fertilization and solidarity when we had our candlelight vigil, where we marched for reparations. It was massive, and all kinds of people were involved in that struggle. That's why we got to think back on our work and shout out to those who kept raising the issue of that document, because it really was a struggle, and it's still a struggle. And now we know for sure that it was deliberate and intentional, that document that was so important. And the issue around reparations was the issue, because at the time when Condoleezza Rice said we knew the conference was going to be a problem because of reparations for African slaves and the issue of Israel. And I mean, she sounded like she's having some kind of out-of-body experience, right? Because you Black and against reparations, but we got to recognize the class aspect of our struggle. And Nkrumah did sound that out. And if you're interested in really seeing how that analysis plays out, I think that book would be a good place to start, Class Struggle in Africa. Not that we don't have class struggle in this country, but I think some of the things we experienced in Durban speak to the fact that there were collaborators who went along with the program of literally trying to wipe us out in terms of our existence. So I just shout out to those who were involved, and we need a second coming. We really need, I don't care how you wear your hair, but we need a second coming in terms of understanding around ourselves as Black people, and not pushing back on that, but pushing forward on the notion that not only is there power in Blackness, but there's beauty in Blackness. So we need that.
I just wanted to ask the name of the document, how we can get a hold of it.
The Durban Declaration and Program of Action. Just do a Google search, for that. It's also known as the DDPA. Right? If you look that up, you can download it right now on your phone, computer, anything. It's available on Google. It's going to come up from a multitude of sites, but you'll probably find it most easily, you know, from the World Conference Against Racism UN site. That's where you'll easily go find it.
Peace, everybody. So I think too, I was lucky enough to be at the UN Conference Against World Racism. I was part of a delegation called The World Within, and I sat on the Youth Reparations International Committee as well as watched Condoleezza Rice and then Colin Powell literally get up and walk out in front of over 10,000 people. I was also part of Black August, a hip hop celebration and hip hop political prisoners with Kali and other folks. And I think two things that always are important to remember as well is that that was, I think, one of the first times internationally that a new generation of people really began to understand what was happening in Palestine. Yes. And the idea of a Palestinian, not only state, but the right of return and self-determination. And that's also a reason many US government officials walked out or were really pretty bad in all the press conferences and how they were talking. There was also the Durban 400 delegation that went from within the United States. But I think one of the other things that gets left out is that was also a very defining moment for people of African descent in Latin America and the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, right? So there were people from Colombia and people from Bolivia and people from Venezuela, people from Puerto Rico that were also saying, we are African descendants. We, particularly as Puerto Ricans, demand a right to decolonize, but we are also demanding reparations for all African descendants throughout the world. And I think, right, we're in a moment 15 years later where millions and millions of African descendants in what we know as Latin America and the Caribbean are clear that they are African descendants, and they are clear that they are being treated the way they're treated in their respective countries because of their proximity to Blackness or their proximity to Black power politics. And those people are murdered, and they're kidnapped, and they're tortured, right? And I think it's such a weird dichotomy that is happening now in 2016 when you see this idea of Black Lives Matter, which is not only a call, right? I mean, there are chapters, and I am part of Black Lives Matter as an organizer, but the dichotomy that I think we need to really grapple with is while the UN Conference on World Racism that essentially, because of all the work of the people, brings about an international decade for people of African descent, within a Black Lives Matter context, there has been a narrowing of Blackness. That's right. And who belongs and who's included. And often in a lot of the conversations with a lot of the young, mostly young folks within Black Lives Matter 20 to 30, they are not clear. They don't have a world understanding of Blackness. Even though with social media, the boundaries are borderless, right? Like you can have a conversation with anybody, or you can hear what's happening in Colombia or Bolivia or Venezuela. You can understand in a way who's gonna suffer the most in Puerto Rico right now with the bill that just passed that is going to basically starve my homeland. And I know who's going to suffer the most, and I know who's going to be militarized the most. It's not going to be the people in San Juan. It's going to be the people in Louisa. It's going to be people in the projects that are already heavily militarized by the police. But I think we, as those that see Black power and have a broader understanding of Blackness, have to understand that it actually has been narrowed in a lot of organizing and political spaces. And I'm never one to not be honest and not be forthright. And it is disheartening to sometimes walk into spaces where you're literally told, you're not Black, you don't belong here. You may think you're Afro-Latino, but you're not Black, so you don't have space in here. right? That's currently
That's
what's
true.
happening
That's
in
true.
some of the movement spaces. And I'm not saying that comes from the leadership or from anybody who's doing it on purpose. Look, the newest term that I'm grappling with, literally, is non-Black people of color. And I'm like, I'm confused. Like, and I've really been asking people, because I was just in Chicago at a gathering where it was used, and I said,
Wow.
can you explain that to me? And they were like, why are you mad? I said, no, I need to know what that means to
That's
you.
right.
What do you mean when you say a non-Black person of color? You saying if you're not African in America? Are you going by phenotype? Are you going by language? Like, and that is the new term that is being used in a lot of movement and organizing spaces.
Dangerous.
With that being said, I feel, you know, we keep pushing and doing the work, but I think it would be disingenuous as someone who luckily happens to be in a lot of spaces, and I'm very happy about that, to be at the age I'm at and come up how I came through and have gotten my Blackness and my politics through Malcolm X grassroots movement or through going to the UN Conference Against World Racism. If I'm at my age 44 and people are like, you're not Black, you need to get out of this space, what does that mean for a 26-year-old?
Right.
That's Afro-Colombian, that has fled their country, that's Afro-Bolivian, Afro-Honduran, Afro-El Salvadorian, who's trying to find their Blackness and decolonize the mind, and then walk into spaces where they're like, and that well Black person that comes to me, not well.
That's right.
Right? And that's what's happening. I think it's something that we really have to grapple with. I don't want to spend that time this weekend. Like, I came here to be part of Black revolutionary love and what Black power looks like, where it's not questioned, because we're more about a Black politic, and that's critically important. But I think that's something that some folks just have to keep in mind. And then essentially what it means, right? It's like white supremacy is winning. In that sense,
Exactly.
in that sense, it's winning. And I think it would be important for younger folks to revisit Walk Hard. Not only can you download the documents, all the videos from all the sessions are available and up. There's so much footage out there that the UN has actually uploaded to the site, just to see where we were at 15 years ago, and not to say that we completely regressed, but how can we stop where we're at right now and how we talk about people of African descent, and how can we uplift the fact there are millions and millions of specifically Afro-Latinos who are calling themselves that, who are coming into a consciousness and are very clear that what will be beneficial to them is a Black power policy.
Absolutely.
We touched on a little bit of that before you came, Rose, about communicating, how we communicate. I think you went a little bit deeper, but just like we talked about Africana, you just throw out a general question, and some of y'all better not answer. You know that they answer. But which country in the Western Hemisphere has the greatest concentration of Black folks?
You don't want us to answer.
No, not you.
Okay. All right.
Not you, dog. You already.
Which country?
Huh? It's Brazil. Brazil has the second, but if you look at by the sheer number of Black people per country, the largest is Nigeria, and number 2 is Brazil, right? You just think about that. And that's not something that gets translated, I think, or interpreted within, at least in a lot of English-speaking definitions of who's Black and who's African. And I think sometimes it's important for us to put that out, because there's actually more folks of African descent not in the United States in the Western Hemisphere than there are in the United States in the Western Hemisphere. But often, at least the way in which we frame it, is those of us from the United States or some of the English-speaking countries that kind of dominate at least the narrative of how it's told of the struggle in the Western Hemisphere for liberation. And I think that kind of gets back to some of the things that we want to challenge.
Can I add something to that, Kali? Is that okay? Can you all hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
No, just to say as well, though, on the Black Brazil, one of the things that I was reading recently was that 118 youth are killed, largely youth are killed every single day in Brazil. And the majority of those are Black youth. 118 every day. Yeah. So they're calling it a silent genocide. I don't know how silent that is. But just to put into context what you were saying about Blackness and how dominant the US struggle is in terms of what gets heard around the world versus what doesn't get heard. And I also just wanted to add to what Rosa was saying around Palestinian solidarity. One of the things that's been really important, I think, throughout our struggle has been those questions of solidarity internationally with other struggles against imperialism. And I think that is, along with us needing to strengthen our Pan-African links, we do need to strengthen those solidarity links. My mother was at the 1976 Pan-African Congress in Dar es Salaam. And during that Congress, the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, was recognized as an African liberation organization, as a solidarity gesture. The PLO came and and were recognized that way. We're losing those links really strongly, and the propaganda, Israeli propaganda, Zionist propaganda in Africa is really strong. And Israel is providing aid to Africa in military aid and other aid in different ways that we need to pay attention to, because I think those kinds of international disconnects and contradictions become really important in our own struggle too.
My name is Heidi Maria Lopez. I came from New York, born and raised there. I am of East Ghana descent, which most folks know as Dominican. And I want to raise 2 points. One, it's been difficult to come to the mic, not because I'm afraid, but because the format is, it feels contrary to like living liberation. So I feel like, and I say that with like absolute love, right? And in a way to like take up the invitation to struggle together, to say like, what are the ways that we are embodying forms of oppression that we actually want to dismantle? So to say that we literally want to be able to connect and see each other and then be sitting in a way where we literally cannot connect and see with one another is something that can perpetuate what it is that we don't want to see, and like to what extent does that exist? So I want to say that in that sense of like, what ways do we actually live liberation? I feel like I came down here very concerned that, yeah, like I didn't know, would I be Black enough for this space, right? Like, am I Black enough for this space because of the experience that the sister raised, that like some spaces are like, you're not actually Black. And I also want to say, because I'm a both and kind of person, that is something that it has been done intentionally for me to even question that, because with the intervention of the United States in all of our countries, there are still so many Spanish-speaking Caribbean people in particular, I'll speak from my perspective, that are absolute bigots, and that will make it clear that they are not of African descent, that they will try everything in their might and will and power to say that that is not who I am. You know, I travel across the country, and the salons outside of the United States, all they have to say is Dominican style, and everybody knows that means that you're gonna get your hair straight as possible, right? So like, I'm clear too that while there is an awakening of folks who are saying we are African, we are of African descent, we understand that the majority of Africans that were brought and kidnapped and brought into the United States actually came through Brazil and the Caribbean. So we have these strong connections, right? Like that seasoning, as they called it, to say, let's break you down for a few generations in the Caribbean before we bring you into what would become the United States, is our link to this, like to this work, in addition to the link that we had before slavery. But I say that to say that it is both and, that I understand why, in the sense of survival, people who have a very specific experience as Black people in the United States is something very real that I also have to recognize. right? That there is a conversation that I have to, and my people have to uplift that. As a Dominican woman growing up in the United States, I do not have the experience of a Black woman growing up in the United States. That is true and very real. And I think that that for me is a tension that we often try to just make one thing or the other. Like, oh, just claim your Blackness and everything will be okay. It's like, oh, but my first language is Spanish, right? So like, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I'm not interpreted depending on where I am in the United States as a Black woman, or depending on how I'm wearing my hair, or whatever the case is. So I feel like there's more to that struggle that is very real and needs to be grappled with, because even in the advertisement for this event, it wasn't put in multiple languages. So how do I bring my elders if there is no interpretation, right? Like, how do I view the coup that's happening in Brazil as part of the struggle, which is like not, right? Like, how is that raised up? How is it that the countries that we mentioned when we talk about these struggles are not usually inclusive of Spanish-speaking Caribbean countries? And how did my people help to create that by being like, no, they don't say morena, you know, I'm not Black? And how also do our organizing spaces perpetuate that by not saying, this is a space that is explicitly including Spanish-speaking people of the diaspora. So I want to uplift that.
Because it allows me to be an expression of what I am as a Christian. I am a Christian. I love it, and it gets better and better every day. But it has to, and I'll be the first to acknowledge that it's a sleeping institution in America. It's a viable, it's an integral institution as far as Black people are concerned. I grew up in, as I said, I'm a native Jacksonian, and it was the church that was the basis of the movement. As a little girl, I remember that even Medgar Evers left the church that my family was a major part of the night that he was assassinated. New Jerusalem. I love it. I used to sing the choir. But anyway, and I think it's an organization, it's a way that I connect with people. And I've been around, you know, I've been through the circle. In college, I was a member of the Black Student Organization in an all-white town, all-white campus. And you know, and looking back at it now, and I think I asked someone on the phone, I said, now what does it mean in 2016? Because what it meant when I was in college is something different. I think it has an evolution, and it has a necessary evolution. And I'm glad that we're having this conference. And I do want to say that this is an organization that is at the forefront where a lot of my people, we need to be concerned about all kinds of issues, and we're not. And even, I think, I look on my street, and when the recycling truck comes along, there are very few of us in our community who will recycle, even though we suffer a lot in that particular area. So I really want to take this minute to just thank this organization for allowing themselves to be used, and I hope to get more help, to bring to the forefront issues that our people should be concerned about. But let me say this, that I really thank God for the ministry that I'm under, because we're international. My pastor said the first time, he tells all of us, you just get your passport, you can go. And I have family members who set up organizations to help wells, start wells, and I haven't been, but I go send. I support them. I haven't been saying you need to go. But, and they're getting ready to go again. But the way that I connect with people from all around the world is by way of the Spirit. I can feel some of you who've been up here and say, well, let me in this space. But it's in the kingdom, and I thank God for the teaching on the kingdom. I have to have a kingdom mindset about things. It's not about me and my four. It's not about me and just the people in Jackson. It's not about me and just the people in Mississippi. We struggle, but I thank God for the struggle. Because I think, really, to be honest with you, I can make it in Him anywhere in this world. Because I grew up in Borgia, my people are from the Delta, They had a hard time, but we came through the struggle. It's how you come through the process. It's all about the process. And I think what we all, no matter what color we are, we're going through the process. Life is a process. But in the kingdom teaching, I began to make connections. I don't have a problem with loving people because I've come to the realization that I can't love you on my own. I cannot accept you in my space on my own. I cannot get through the struggles of being a native Mississippian and seeing one side, just reading the newspaper. I think they even put out different newspapers in different neighborhoods. But in different neighborhoods, it was just strange. But I'm able to come through the struggle because of the kingdom, because of him. And I've come to the realization, I don't have any power. So that's why I was interested in, what does this term mean now? But in him, I have the power. And it's how I understand the structure of the kingdom and how I am to function in the kingdom. And it's not just in Jackson, it's not just in Mississippi, but it's worldwide. And I think that the problems, and I'd like for our speaker to speak to that. Even after the struggle, there has to be some balance. I think what is lacking in a lot of us, and our people worldwide, is a lack of a value system, a lack of connection in the spiritual realm. And when we come together in the spiritual realm, I understand your struggle, and I can relate to your struggle. But outside of that, I have problems connecting. But I don't have any problems in the kingdom. And I don't have any problems in him because it's not my love, but it's his love. I tell you, love, and there has to be a foundation. And that foundation is love. That foundation is love. That's what it is. And when you can love people by way of his spirit, then you don't have any problems in seeing your issues and seeing your point of view. But I'd like for the sisters to especially address this, because after a process, people still have to have values. We kill each other. I know part of it is internalization, but I came up in the era when, hey, people hardly had anything, but we didn't have the problems in terms of our love for each other that we have here. And I know it's worldwide. It's not just in Jackson that you have these killings or what have you. But we need a value system. My value system comes from the kingdom. There's a vision in the kingdom. There's leadership and there's respect for leadership in the kingdom. Right now, the best person, the most respectful person in my life is my pastor and his wife, because I'm not married. And so I kind of rely on them. They got my back. So I think that we're going to have to discuss the church to a certain extent, because it's a backbone, especially when we talk about Black people in America, especially about Black people in the South.
We're going to see if we can get a value to deal with that. I know one thing I would offer, it may be about a different conversation on international level than the church than it is about spirit and faith. Because in large parts of the continent, Islam is what has more believers than Christianity. They from the same family tree, if you would. So there's more similarities than there are differences. But one of the things that I think we have to be mindful of in the era that we live in is that, spiritual, organized religion, I mean, I put that on spirituality. Organized religion is being used as a political tool in country after country to attack a lot of people. So you have in the United States, we have, very reactionary, very conservative Christianity. In a lot of the Islamic world, we have, a very reactionary and conservative Islam. In India, there's a right-wing Hindu movement, which is now in control of the government of that country. In the Zionist project, you have a right-wing Zionist piece, which is now in control of that government. You see the rise of kind of a right-wing Christian thing in parts of Europe and in parts of Latin America. So I think I'm just putting it out there to say that we have to have a balance
And we have to not take out the certain aspects of all of these teachings, which are about uplifting those who are most in need and not using them as cannon fodder or as your personal pets or just a downtrodden group to be exploited. So in all these questions, I think in terms of you talking about power, you know, how is all of these different teachings and manifestations of our understanding of what it means to be human or how to grow into our humanity, right? That's how I look at all these teachings in one form or another, different ways to get to a higher level of our own understanding of ourselves. How do they not be used as tools against the people, right? And that's an ongoing struggle I think that we have to figure out, because we're starting to see this being promoted as a solution as the economic crisis on the planet increases, the ecological crisis deepens, and the structure around capitalism, imperialism as it became and becoming more reactionary. Some people are flocking to that, some people are being driven to that, and some people are only being given that as the only viable choice or solution as to how they have to organize their lives. It's not something they're doing by choice, they're doing it more by coercion and or outright force. So I'd like for Hakima to answer that herself, but it's a piece that I know the power of spirituality in our people's struggle here in North America. I wouldn't deny that one iota, but I've also had the benefit of traveling and also having people who are Muslim in my family, and that's more what historically my orientation as a spiritual practice has leaned toward. I also know how it can be used to reinforce the systems of domination that exist on the planet, right? Which I know that's not the spirit that you're speaking in, but that is a political reality that we got to deal with. Hakima's back. I want to go to Willie first, and Willie can come on in and Hakima. And then I want to close this out, folks, because if we have some food ready, they was back there sweating for that. I don't want to get too cold. We don't want people walking out here saying that y'all didn't get fed and we treat y'all badly down here in Mississippi. That's not how we do things.
My name is Willie Bell. I want to speak to the Christian thing. I'm a Christian minister, right? But what I want to say here is when you look at the countries that colonized, the majority, if not all of them, were Christian. When you look at that, when you look at the abuse that people took, they took it from people who were, at the end of the day, was going to go to some church or going to go to, there was a lot of Catholicism, they were going to go there. But yet we will get caught up in denouncing our brother because he is Muslim. We will get caught up in denouncing our brother that he is Hebrew Israelite. We will get caught up into that thing. Now, in the Christian Bible, it says it speaks on love. It speaks on love in so many places. Yet we will get caught up in fighting somebody else's battle when it's really fighting against our own brothers. And we really have to be careful of that because, and I'm going to go here. Most of us study the King James Version, but we must understand that it is a version. See, we never look at that, but it is a version. It is really not all of the books, and there are purposes for some of these things, and so we can't get caught up in denouncing our brothers and sisters or saying they're less than, because I say that there's no name above the name of Jesus, when really a more proper pronunciation is Jesus Christos, because the J wasn't even there at those times. The J really didn't become popularized in the English language until maybe the 1700s or 17th century. So we we have been somewhat, well, I ain't gonna say somewhat, in the Christian church. The Christian church, the Christian black church, has been the center of our existence here. And we have gotten away from that center, but we also need to get further, we need to further educate our people into there is more that we've been miseducated about, and not end up in a fight for somebody else, and a fight, and then we're fighting against ourselves. So I mean, I want to respond, but in the sense of, I don't want to seem like I'm picking or anything on Leila. In any way, shape, or form. Yeah, okay. In any way, because I'm not, but we have more commonalities. We really have a large commonality with Muslims, but we have not been educated in that, and we run away from the Quran to even read it. Yeah. And because we're scared that if I read it, then something's going to happen to me, or I may even change the way I'm thinking. When really we're just understanding another brother from another mother is what we're doing. So, I just want to say.
Hakima, oh, dude, I think we may have lost it. I think we may have lost it again. All right, so I want to close us out. Just briefly, again, we have one more night of this format, then we are abandoning it. It's gone. All right. And tomorrow is really about just kind of setting a context, setting a historical record. We're going to really try to open it up. We did have some of the things that you had in mind about how we meet and greet. We still have a lot to learn, so everybody here can teach us different ways of doing, being. We opened it, that's why we have it at open. But tomorrow, starting at 6 o'clock, that's all on the ground. There's no TV, nobody talking. We can look directly at each other. We're looking at a screen and trying to connect with people. I do want us to appreciate and respect those who took the time out to try and join us. The technical issue was more on our end, I think it was on theirs. And these technology things, we depend upon them. They, there's always the results of something in the machine. But I do want to respect those folks, including Hakima, Ester, Lybon, and Kofi, who we all didn't get a chance to meet, unfortunately. We will try to have them contribute in different ways throughout the weekend. Probably not be on social media, but thank them for their contributions and hopefully we can get more from them. But tomorrow, we have a good generational dialogue. Going to explore some of the histories. Really want to try to get into one of the things that we really want to go deeper into is kind of the unfulfilled quest for Black power. How Black power will wind up is being exploited, for lack of a better term. Many of you some of you may, because you lived through it, remember when Richard Nixon defined Black power as Black capitalism.
That's right. He said right on.
And appointed more Black people than a lot of Democrats in different offices, right or wrong. So we want to explore some of that, break that down, try to work and struggle towards some common definition and understanding. Just to give a context, if anybody doubted or wondered, I'm glad folks brought it in. The two organizations that put this together, even though we want to translate it in a number of different languages, our resources, time, capacity, and skill, quite frankly, to do some of that is limited, but the intent is always to be broad and inclusive. We internationalists within this organization. Our definition of who is and what is African is extensively broad. It is not limited, not narrow. Just so folks know, we're rooted in Jackson. For a good part of our core, we already got Puerto Ricans and Asians who are active part of our leadership, not just in open body. So that's who we are. So people, if you're engaging in social media, and even though folks may not be able, the majority of our folks, particularly in Jackson, may not be able to respond back in social media in Spanish or French or Portuguese or Arabic or anything else, do invite them to be involved in the process, because it's something we want to deliberately break down those barriers of exchange that we talked about and how do we close that gap. Definitely invite folks to be involved and to be engaged. We want to have a broad conversation, and it's not just about a limited experience here in the 50,000 United States held by the United States government. That's not our framework. So, definitely include them in, and we're talking about having a broad conversation. That's why we try to lift to this Pan-Africanism. People have different understandings around that. But when we said we wanted to include all people of African descent, that's literally what we mean. So involve folks in there. So tomorrow, 6 o'clock, the center will be open probably about 10 o'clock. If folks want to come, help us volunteer and put some other stuff together, you're more than welcome. While you're here from out of town, we will be open and involved and engaged. Come check us out and see some more stuff that we're doing and that we'll be involved in. It's going to be hard to maybe talk and sit down with some of the events you want to do. It'll be emotional, but we'll make as much time and space available to share what we know, what we're doing, what we're about with everybody. And then the last thing, we do want to encourage folks to don't turn anybody away because they don't have any money in their pocket. But you all know the food and all that stuff is not free. So if you can't afford to register, we can understand that. But if anybody, can just make whatever donation you can, because it just goes to paying for the food, paying for the meals, please drop it off at the registration table and give Nubia's Place Cafe and Catering crew a big hand when you see them. They'll be cooking for us and laboring, in that kitchen, which is behind you, throughout the weekend. And a lot of really won't be able to participate in the same way that you are able to participate. So give them some love and respect throughout the weekend. And then, we got Dara over here, one of our board members, encouraging everybody to pick up t-shirts throughout the weekend. Buy t. But we can do that later. It's going to be in the whole weekend. Hopefully everybody will be enjoying this throughout this weekend and engage. There are some materials, last thing, there are some framing materials for this conversation. They ain't perfect, they intend to be perfect. One thing that we will have to put up are a broader definition of our community agreements and norms. You see some of them written on the wall. We expect and welcome intense struggle with each other over a number of different questions and issues, but to do them in a respectful manner, in a way to try to get people to understand where you're coming from, not to put somebody down even if you got a difference with them. That's a guiding principle by which we try to engage and struggle with. We're not always perfect in it, but that's the spirit in which we try to operate in. So I invite everybody to look at that, and then there's some things that we try to do just from our vantage point, from Cooperation Jackson and Malcolm X Grassroots movements, and things that we try to outline from our vantage point. It may not be yours, and to participate don't have to be yours, but some things in terms of us trying to come up with a framework of saying from our vantage point and our view around the history of the subject, there's some clear things that we've come up with our kind of points of agreement and or demarcation, as we're calling it, a disagreement, right? And so for us, in the course of, for instance, this one, we don't see Black power being an extension of Black capitalism. We see that as being antithetical to the very notion of African liberation. That may not be your definition. That may not be your understanding. And that is fine, but that is the groundwork on which we are standing and projecting this conversation. So we want to be transparent and clear about that. Those are in the materials. They're online. If you want to go to the website and check that out tonight, I encourage you to do so. And they're also posted on the Facebook group that we set up for this conference for folks to look at. You will get a package with all those materials tomorrow night. But if you want to look at it ahead of time, please do, and I encourage everybody to do, because I think it'll enrich the conversation whether you agree or disagree. So with that, I want to close this out. I want to thank you all for coming, whether you came from down the block or half a world away, and we'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah, go eat.